It began the way most stories never should, with a lone, battered German shepherd standing motionless in the center of a deserted, snow-swept highway, the wind screaming down out of the Canadian north, flinging icy daggers against the blacktop. The dog's coat, once a proud sable, was ragged and crusted with ice. Between its jaws, clamped tight like a final plea, dangled a blood-stained police badge that glinted whenever lightning stitched the sky. Officer Ethan Cooper had seen plenty during his short time on the Pine Bridge Force, but nothing prepared him for this. The cruiser's headlights cut through the swirling whiteout, catching the reflective strip on the dog's battered collar. Ethan's breath misted as he braked, boots crunching as he stepped onto the frozen road. This night was supposed to be his first off-duty shift in weeks. A quiet one, maybe a takeout burger, a phone call to his folks. Instead, fate had led him here. He called out, "Easy, boy! What are you doing out here?" The shepherd flinched but didn't run, its eyes locked on his. They were dark, intelligent, haunted. As Ethan crept closer, he realized this dog wasn't lost. He was waiting. Ethan's flashlight beam flickered over the dog's tag, then the badge. For a moment, his heart stopped. The name was all too familiar. Madison Lee. The officer who had trained him. The friend who had vanished 2 weeks ago without a trace. His mind raced. Madison's badge had been missing since the night she disappeared, and every cop in Pine Bridge had been warned off talking about her case. Suspicious circumstances, the chief had called it, but Ethan never believed she just ran away. Now, somehow, this dog, Madison's dog, Ethan realized with a gut punch, had crossed miles of deadly cold, carrying the only clue anyone had found. "Ranger?" Ethan breathed. The name barely left his lips before the shepherd's ears pricked up. With a low, urgent whine, Ranger limped toward the shoulder of the highway, pausing to look back. He wanted Ethan to follow. The blizzard thickened, gusts stinging Ethan's cheeks and nose. For a split second, doubt gnawed at him. Who'd risk freezing to death on a night like this? Chasing a dog into the woods, in a county where more people went missing than deer? Then Ethan saw the desperation in Ranger's eyes, the silent plea, the loyalty that refused to quit. They plunged off the shoulder together. Immediately, the world narrowed to shadow and storm. Trees creaked, branches whipped by icy wind. Ranger moved with a strange, wounded purpose, his head low, tail flicking. Ethan kept his hand on his holster, nerves buzzing. Every sound in the forest was amplified. A cracking limb, his own ragged breathing, the distant roar of a semi-truck heading the other direction. They trekked deeper into the woods, snow crunching beneath Ethan's boots, the wind carrying phantom voices. It was then Ethan's suspicion turned to dread. He reached out, brushing snow from the badge on Ranger's collar, confirming the initials ML burned into the leather. This wasn't just a lost dog. This was Madison's partner, her loyal K9, abandoned and bleeding, leading him somewhere no sane man would willingly go. Suddenly, Ranger halted, body rigid. Ethan froze, pulse thundering. Somewhere behind them, hidden by thick pine, a pair of headlights blinked through the trees, too steady, too slow, not just passing through. Someone was watching. Ethan ducked, heart in his throat. Ranger pressed close, ears flattened, a low rumble vibrating through his chest. The headlights crept along the road before winking out, swallowed by the storm. Ethan's gut twisted. Out here, only two kinds of people drove these back roads in a blizzard. Those desperate to find something, and those desperate to hide. A branch cracked nearby. Too deliberate. Ethan's training kicked in. He crouched lower, scanning the woods, senses sharpened by adrenaline and fear. The forest was a labyrinth of shifting shadows, the storm making everything slippery and surreal. Ranger pressed forward, glancing back with each careful step, as if making sure Ethan was still behind him. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a narrow game trail snaking deeper into the trees. For a split second, Ethan glimpsed a figure, a tall shape cloaked in black, standing impossibly still at the edge of the clearing. Watching. Waiting. Ethan's blood chilled. The stalker's presence wasn't just a figment of fear. It was real, and it was hunting. Ranger whined, urging him forward. The dog's body language changed, tense, urgent, ears pinned flat. Ethan followed, the two of them barely visible beneath the storm's furious curtain. Somewhere behind, the forest seemed to close in, alive with unseen threats. Every instinct screamed at Ethan to turn back, call for backup, but something deeper, loyalty, stubbornness, maybe hope, kept him moving. As they pressed on, Ethan realized, whatever had happened to Madison wasn't over. Ranger was risking everything tonight for one last chance, one last act of devotion. He squared his shoulders and plunged deeper into the blizzard, the taste of danger sharp in the air. His fate now inseparably tied to the battered shepherd at his side. The storm was only just beginning. Snow hammered the pine branches, each gust rattling ice off the needles as Ethan and Ranger pushed through the thickening forest. The blizzard made everything surreal, turning trees into ghostly shapes and erasing any sense of direction. Ethan's flashlight beam danced ahead, illuminating swirls of snow and the determined, limping figure of Ranger. Each breath burned in his chest. Every few steps, Ranger paused, scanning the darkness with an instinct Ethan knew came from years of K-9 training. A dog who'd learned to find the lost, the desperate, the dangerous. They pressed on for what felt like an eternity, the wind screaming, the cold gnawing into Ethan's fingers. It would have been easy to get lost, easy to turn back and call for help. But there was something unbreakable about the way Ranger led the way, a fierce loyalty that inspired Ethan to push past his own fear. Suddenly, the woods thinned, opening into a small clearing ringed by black, skeletal trees. Ethan's boots crunched onto a patch of frozen ground, the snow here strangely shallow. Ranger sniffed the air, hackles bristling, then darted forward with a burst of new energy. Ethan followed, shining his light in wide arcs. There, half buried beneath the snow and leaves, something metallic caught the light. Ethan knelt, brushing away the debris, his heart racing. It was a battered military locator beacon, the kind used in search and rescue ops, blinking a weak red light. Nearby, the snow was churned up, the ground scraped and bloodied. Ethan's stomach turned. Boot prints, paw prints, and drag marks. Signs of a struggle, all half frozen into the mud. He leaned closer, spotting a torn scrap of Madison's signature blue parka snagged on a branch. Madison was here, he muttered, voice trembling. Ranger whined, circling the area, then barking sharply at a fresh set of footprints that vanished into the trees. Ethan's nerves sparked. He wasn't alone. Someone else had been here. Recently. A low, crunching noise echoed from the far side of the clearing. Ethan tensed, standing slowly, his hand drifting to the grip of his service pistol. Ranger moved between him and the sound, every muscle taut. For a heartbeat, everything went still. The wind dropped, the forest silent except for Ethan's pulse thundering in his ears. Suddenly, a masked figure exploded from the underbrush, lunging straight for Ethan. The world spun. Ethan staggered back, gun half drawn, as the attacker slammed into him, knocking the flashlight flying. The beam spun wildly, throwing monstrous shadows across the trees. Ethan fought to keep his footing, grappling with the stranger, but he was losing ground. The assailant was strong, desperate, wielding a heavy branch like a club. Ethan blocked one blow, then another, his training battling against panic. The cold made his limbs sluggish, but adrenaline surged through him. Then Ranger hurled himself at the attacker, teeth flashing, a deep, ferocious growl splitting the night. The masked figure screamed, trying to kick Ranger away, but the dog clamped down hard on the attacker's arm. Blood sprayed, painting the snow in vivid streaks. Ranger's eyes burned with a savage loyalty that left no room for mercy. Ethan seized his chance. He shoved the attacker, twisting free, then pinned them to the ground. The masked figure writhed, hissing curses. Ethan ripped the mask away, revealing a face he didn't recognize. Gaunt, wild-eyed, reeking of fear and rage. "Who sent you? Where's Madison?" Ethan barked, pressing his knee into the attacker's back. The man spat blood, snarling, "You're too late! You should have left her alone!" Before Ethan could react, the attacker surged up, throwing Ethan off. He dashed for the trees, bleeding and limping, disappearing into the storm before Ethan could chase. Ethan drew his gun, breathing hard, but Ranger whimpered, a sharp, wounded cry. Ethan spun, panic flaring. Ranger limped toward him, a fresh gash torn across his shoulder, blood trickling through his fur. Ethan dropped to his knees, tearing off his scarf and pressing it to the wound. "Hang on, buddy! Hang on!" he urged. Ranger's chest heaved, but his eyes stayed locked on Ethan, full of pain but unwilling to back down. Ethan's mind whirled. That was no random attack. Someone wanted him dead, wanted to erase any trace of what happened to Madison. The locator beacon, the torn jacket, the fight. Everything pointed to a bigger, darker secret buried in these woods. Whatever Madison had found, she'd paid a terrible price for it. And now so would Ethan, unless he figured it out. With Ranger wounded and the snow closing in, Ethan knew he had to get out. Fast, he scooped Ranger into his arms, gritting his teeth against the dog's weight. Together they staggered back toward the town's distant glow, hearts pounding, fear and resolve warring inside them. The forest seemed alive, watching as they fled. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that more eyes waited in the darkness, that their every move was being tracked. But he clung to Ranger, whispering words of encouragement, promising he'd never let the dog, or Madison, down again. When they finally reached Ethan's battered pickup parked along a forgotten trail, he wrapped Ranger in a blanket, cranked the heat, and tore away from the woods, headlights slicing through the blizzard. As they drove, Ethan's thoughts spun in endless circles. Ranger's blood stained the seat. The badge, Madison's badge, rested on the dashboard, a silent accusation. The fight, the beacon, the attacker's warning, they all pointed to a conspiracy far bigger than a single missing cop. He glanced at Ranger, the dog's head resting on his lap, eyes half shut but still burning with purpose. "We're in this together, aren't we?" Ethan whispered. Ranger gave a faint thump of his tail. Outside, the storm howled, but inside that battered old truck, a bond was forming. One forged in pain, fear, and a stubborn refusal to let go. Tonight, Ethan realized, was only the beginning. Ethan's house was little more than a weathered bungalow at the edge of Pine Bridge, warm, cluttered, walls lined with photos and faded memorabilia from better days. The storm rattled the windows as he carried Ranger inside, setting the dog gently on a folded towel beside the old fireplace. Ranger whimpered, muscles trembling, but never once took his eyes off Ethan. The pain was plain. Blood had soaked through the scarf, staining his fur and the hardwood floor beneath. Ethan worked quickly. He fetched a battered first aid kit from under the kitchen sink, hands shaking as he fumbled for antiseptic and gauze. Easy, boy. I know it hurts, he murmured, forcing himself to breathe slow, steady breaths, while Ranger's ears flicked back, but he stayed still, teeth bared in silent endurance. The dog's trust, hard-won and absolute, was almost harder to bear than the sight of the wound itself. He cleaned Ranger's shoulder, wincing as the shepherd growled under his breath but didn't snap. The old scars beneath the fresh gash told stories of other battles, of a life spent chasing criminals and defending his partner. Madison had always said Ranger was too stubborn for his own good, but Ethan saw something else in the animal's eyes, the same loyalty and pain that haunted him since Madison disappeared. As the fire warmed the room, Ethan remembered the first time he met Madison Lee. He'd been a rookie, all nerves and awkwardness, nearly dropping his coffee in front of the whole squad. Madison had laughed, a sound that cut through tension like sunlight on snow, and tossed him a donut, as if they'd been partners forever. "It's not about looking tough, Coop," she'd told him, clapping his shoulder. "It's about having each other's backs, no matter what." He'd looked up to her from the start. They'd worked a few cases together, some easy, some messy. She was sharp, brave, never afraid to call out injustice, even when it put her at odds with the old guard at the department. He remembered late-night stakeouts, Madison sharing stories about her old K-9 unit, about Ranger's impossible nose and how he once sniffed out a kidnap victim under 6 feet of concrete. She'd called Ranger her guardian angel in a fur coat. The three of them, for a short time, had felt unstoppable. But all that changed after the mayor's house burned down last fall, and the whispers about stolen evidence and payoffs started swirling. Madison had grown quiet, suspicious of everyone, even some on the force. She confided in Ethan one night at the diner, her eyes shadowed, voice barely above a whisper. "There's something rotten here, Coop. If anything happens to me, promise you'll take care of Ranger." He'd promised, but never believed he'd have to keep that word. Now, tending Ranger's wounds, guilt gnawed at Ethan. Maybe if he'd listened closer, if he'd pushed harder, maybe Madison wouldn't have vanished. He watched the shepherd's chest rise and fall, wondered how many nights Ranger had waited, alone and hurting, hoping his partner would come home. After bandaging Ranger, Ethan collapsed on the threadbare couch, exhaustion finally catching up. He glanced at the clock, nearly 4 a.m., but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself reaching for his old leather journal, the one Madison had given him as a graduation gift. He flipped to a blank page, the crackle of the fire and Ranger's breathing filling the silence. "Loss isn't just absence," he wrote, the words coming haltingly. "It's the echo of a voice in an empty room, the click of claws on linoleum, the guilt of promises broken. It's loving someone who may never come back." He paused, pen hovering, then added, "But sometimes pain is what ties us together. Me and Ranger, we're both searching for Madison. Maybe for redemption, too." The fire guttered low. Outside, the blizzard howled, but inside, a fragile sense of comfort grew between man and dog. Ranger inched closer, resting his great head on Ethan's foot, eyes closing at last. Ethan reached down, fingers tracing the battered fur between Ranger's ears. "You're not alone, buddy. Not anymore." The morning brought little relief, just gray light seeping through the windows and a gnawing hunger. Ethan rummaged for food, sharing cold chicken with Ranger, who ate with careful dignity. As he cleared up, he caught his own reflection in the kitchen window, pale, unshaven, eyes rimmed with worry. He barely recognized himself, wondered if Madison would have either. He called the precinct, half expecting to be reprimanded for missing the night's check-in. Instead, the chief's voice was cold, impatient. Let it go, Cooper. Madison made her choices. You poking around will only get you hurt. Or worse. That's an order. The line went dead. Ethan stared at the receiver, fury and fear swirling inside. The warning was clear. Whatever happened to Madison, the department didn't want answers. He spent the rest of the morning piecing together clues, scribbling notes and questions on legal pads. Ranger watched, silent and attentive, always alert to Ethan's moods. Now and then, the dog would whine softly, as if urging Ethan not to give up. By noon, Ethan felt the beginnings of something he hadn't known in weeks: hope. The badge, the beacon, the attacker's words, all pointed to a puzzle, one he and Ranger might actually solve. The dog, for his part, seemed stronger already, limping less, tail thumping whenever Ethan spoke. That afternoon, Ethan pulled out the old photos Madison had left behind. Smiling faces at graduations, holidays, cases cracked together. He pressed his palm to one, the weight of memory almost crushing. "We'll find you," he promised, voice steady, heart finally beating to a new rhythm. As the sun began to set, Ethan looked at Ranger and nodded. Healing old wounds wouldn't be easy, but with each other, they might just have a fighting chance. The next steps would be dangerous. But for the first time, Ethan wasn't just chasing ghosts. He was moving forward, with a partner who'd never stopped searching. By morning, the blizzard's fury had softened, leaving Pine Bridge hushed under a heavy quilt of snow. The sky glowed a pale, washed-out blue as Ethan guided Ranger up the steps of the Pine Bridge Veterinary Clinic. The little bell over the door jingled as they entered, bringing a swirl of cold air and the faint, metallic scent of antiseptic. Dr. Olivia Hayes looked up from her paperwork, her eyes widening as she saw Ethan and the battered shepherd limping by his side. Olivia was in her early 30s, with dark curls pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and a gentle steadiness to her voice that had soothed countless injured animals and shaken humans over the years. "Ethan? Is that Ranger?" She dropped her pen and hurried over, her gaze sweeping over Ranger's bandaged shoulder, the blood-matted fur. "What happened to him?" "He saved my life last night," Ethan replied, voice still raw. "We got jumped out near the old forest road. Someone tried to kill me, Liv. Ranger fought him off, but he's hurt. I think he's been out there a long time." Olivia knelt, extending her hand for Ranger to sniff. The dog's eyes met hers, wary but exhausted, and after a tense moment, he allowed her to examine his wounds. She worked quietly, cleaning and stitching the worst of the gash, murmuring reassurance as Ranger flinched at the needle, but never once lashed out. Ethan watched, guilt and gratitude mixing in his chest. "He's lucky," Olivia said softly, finally straightening. "This shoulder's taken a beating before. I remember when Madison used to bring him in for checkups. He was always her shadow, never let anyone else near her patrol car." She hesitated, then glanced at Ethan. "She hasn't come in for months. We all thought, well, no one knew what to think. I'm glad Ranger found you." Ethan swallowed hard. "Liv, I need to know everything you remember about Madison's last days. Did she say anything strange? Act different? Did she mention anyone threatening her?" Olivia shook her head, biting her lip. She stopped talking to most of us, started keeping to herself, missing her standing appointments. I tried to reach out, but she brushed me off. Said she was busy with a case, but I could tell she was scared. The last time I saw her, she hugged Ranger and told me to look out for him. That's not something she'd say unless she was really afraid. A heavy silence settled between them, filled only by the clinic's muffled sounds. The hum of the heater, the distant bark of a dog in the kennels. She was a good friend, Olivia said finally. She didn't deserve this. She put a hand on Ethan's arm, grounding him. If there's anything I can do, let me know. Madison would want us to help each other. Ethan nodded, a lump forming in his throat. For the first time since Madison vanished, he felt like he wasn't alone in his search. Olivia's quiet strength was a reminder that loyalty ran deeper than blood. As they left the clinic, Ranger paused to lick Olivia's hand, a silent thank you, a mark of trust. The moment struck Ethan. Ranger had lost almost everything, just like him, but he was still willing to open up to those who showed kindness. Back at home, Ethan pored over Madison's old files, the ones he'd retrieved from her locker the day after she disappeared. Most were routine, incident reports, expense sheets, boring paperwork. But tucked deep in a manila folder, he found something that made his breath catch. A torn scrap of notebook paper, filled with Madison's cramped handwriting. Numbers, street names, and what looked like a coded message. Ethan stared at it, heart racing. This wasn't just a paranoid note. This was Madison's way of reaching out, even if she couldn't trust anyone on the force. He grabbed his phone, dialing the precinct's main line. The police chief's voice barked through the speaker. "Cooper, what now?" "I need to talk about Madison. I found a note in her files and—" "That's enough," the chief snapped. "You've been told before. Madison Lee's case is closed. You keep poking around, you're going to make yourself a target. This is your last warning." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Are you threatening me, sir?" A cold pause. "No, I'm saving your career. Let it go." The line went dead. Ethan slammed the phone down, anger and dread churning in his gut. He turned to Ranger, who sat quietly by the door, watching every move. "They don't want us to find the truth, which means we have to." The next few hours blurred together as Ethan worked to decode the note. Ranger stayed close, sometimes nosing Ethan's hand, sometimes resting his head on Ethan's knee as if reminding him he wasn't alone in this. Each cryptic phrase on the paper seemed to carry Madison's voice. Hidden addresses, partial license plates, names of people Ethan barely recognized. But there, scribbled in the margin, was something unmistakable. A sketch of the Cold War-era bunker on the edge of town, and a single word: proof. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Ethan. If Madison had hidden evidence there, if the answers to her disappearance, the attacks, and the corruption all pointed to that bunker, he couldn't wait any longer. But beneath the fear, a new feeling sparked: resolve. Madison had risked everything for the truth. Now it was his turn. As darkness crept back over Pinebridge and the snow resumed its silent fall, Ethan gathered his gear, checked Ranger's bandage one more time, and tucked the coded note into his jacket. "We're going to finish what Madison started," he told Ranger. The shepherd's tail thumped in answer, eyes burning with fierce devotion. Outside, the town seemed as quiet and ordinary as ever. But Ethan knew the next step would take them straight into danger. He was done waiting for someone else to save them. Tonight, the real hunt would begin. A sliver of moonlight fought through the drifting clouds as Ethan maneuvered his truck onto the old gravel service road winding north of Pinebridge. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, the bandage on his shoulder fresh, eyes locked ahead, focused, alert, his entire body coiled with purpose. The blizzard had passed but left the landscape transformed, blanketed in a heavy, glassy silence. Every mile Ethan drove brought them closer to the edge of town, further from help. Ethan gripped the coded note Madison had left behind, reading over the numbers and street names as he drove. The old Cold War bunker, half forgotten, rumored to be sealed for decades, loomed at the center of her clues. Whatever secrets she'd uncovered, had led her here. The only question was whether Ethan and Ranger were about to find answers, or fall into the same trap that had swallowed Madison whole. He parked 100 yards from the bunker's rusted chain-link gate, killing the headlights. The world seemed to shrink to the sound of his own heartbeat and Ranger's steady breathing. The bunker squatted beneath a stand of fir trees, surrounded by drifts of snow and the hulks of abandoned vehicles from a different era. Most would have missed it, but Ethan recognized the faint outline of the blast doors, half buried and iced shut. "Stay close," Ethan whispered, and Ranger pressed at his side, tail held low but eyes burning with intensity. They crept across the snow, boots crunching softly, every sense alive. Ethan's flashlight swept the tree line, glinting off the barrel of a toppled generator and shattered glass. As they reached the doors, Ethan jammed his crowbar beneath the frozen handle and heaved. Metal groaned, resisting, then relented with a scream that echoed through the woods. The bunker's interior was a tomb of darkness and stale air, every surface slick with condensation. Ethan's beam traced a path through abandoned crates, peeling posters warning of nuclear fallout, and walls etched with graffiti from teenagers long since grown. Ranger's nose twitched as he sniffed the ground, picking up a scent that made his hackles bristle. They pressed deeper into the corridor. The silence was total, oppressive, a kind of emptiness that only came from long neglect and terrible secrets. Then Ranger stopped dead, barking once, sharp and urgent. Ahead, in a side room marked Command, Ethan spotted the edge of a journal page, fluttering from beneath a dented locker. He knelt, heart hammering. The badge was there. Madison's badge, crusted in blood, the leather strap frayed as if it had been ripped away in a struggle. Next to it, a torn piece of her parka, and the journal page scrawled with frantic, half-finished notes. "They know. If I don't make it out, look for—" The rest was blotted out in blood. Ethan's hands shook as he snapped pictures with his phone, pocketing the badge and journal page. He was about to call the state police when Ranger tensed, growling low in his throat. A footstep scraped behind him. Ethan spun just as a heavy flashlight crashed into his temple, sending stars bursting behind his eyes. He hit the floor, dazed as a masked figure, bigger, meaner than the last, lunged, pinning him with a knee. Ethan gasped, fighting to draw breath as the attacker snarled, "You should have stayed out of this, Cooper. Some things are bigger than you." Ranger exploded from the shadows, teeth bared, a furious force of loyalty and pain. The attacker swung the flashlight, connecting with Ranger's flank, but the dog latched onto his arm, wrenching him off Ethan. In the chaos, Ethan scrambled for his pistol, firing a warning shot that shattered a fluorescent tube overhead, spraying glass across the floor. The attacker roared in pain, twisting free. He raised a pistol. Ethan's brain screamed no and fired. The sound was deafening, echoing down the concrete halls. Ranger yelped and fell, blood splattering the bunker wall. Ethan's world narrowed to a pinprick. He dove, grabbing Ranger and rolling behind a crate as another shot rang out, slamming into the metal where his head had just been. "You're dead, Cooper," the assailant shouted, stomping closer. "Should have let her rot." Ethan gritted his teeth, cradling Ranger, who whimpered but still pushed to his feet, refusing to leave Ethan's side. Ethan's training took over. He flung a broken chair leg across the room, drawing the attacker's aim, then charged out, tackling him in a full-body rush. The two crashed against the wall, trading blows. Ethan fought with everything he had, rage, fear, and the weight of his promise to Madison. Ranger, bleeding but undaunted, limped into the fray, biting the attacker's calf with savage strength. The man howled, kicking out, but Ethan landed a punch that sent him staggering back. Ethan seized the moment, dragging Ranger and himself out the bunker door, slamming it shut behind them. He ran, half carrying Ranger through the snow, the night air burning in his lungs. Behind them, the bunker's door shuddered as the attacker pounded in rage, cursing and promising retribution. Back at the truck, Ethan collapsed in the driver's seat, gasping. He pressed his jacket to Ranger's side, desperate to staunch the bleeding. The shepherd licked Ethan's hand, eyes glazed but determined. "Stay with me, Ranger. I need you. Don't you quit on me now." Tires spinning, Ethan sped through the darkness, dialing Olivia's number with shaking hands. "It's bad, Liv. Ranger's been shot. I have Madison's badge, her notes, evidence. Someone's trying to kill us. Meet me at your clinic." "Hang on, Ethan. I'll be ready. Just get here safe," Olivia replied, voice steely. The world blurred past as Ethan drove, a raw mix of terror and hope surging in his veins. He kept glancing at Ranger, willing the dog to survive, knowing they had finally found proof, but at a terrible price. As Pine Bridge's distant lights flickered through the trees, Ethan realized the real fight was just beginning. The roads into Pine Bridge were near deserted as Ethan barreled through the swirling snow. Ranger sprawled weakly on the seat beside him, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage. Each mile seemed to take forever, headlights carving a trembling path through the darkness. Ethan's knuckles were white on the wheel, his mind a storm of fear and grim determination. He wasn't losing Ranger. Not tonight. Not after everything. He screeched to a halt in front of Olivia's clinic, barely shutting off the truck before rushing inside. Ranger cradled in his arms. Olivia was already waiting, sleeves rolled, exam table cleared, her calmness a lifeline in the chaos. "Put him here, let's work fast," she ordered, already prepping anesthesia and sterile pads. Ethan held Ranger's massive head as Olivia worked, whispering, "Hang on, buddy. You're tougher than this. You've got to make it." Ranger's tail thumped, weak but stubborn. Olivia's eyes were tight with focus as she removed the bullet, stitched the wound, and started an IV. Blood pooled on the gauze. Ethan's breath caught every time Ranger's chest shuddered. Through it all, Olivia kept up a quiet stream of reassurance, both for Ranger and Ethan. "You did good bringing him right in. He's a fighter. If anyone can make it, it's him." Her hands never shook. Finally, she looked up, sweat beading on her brow. "He's stable for now. We'll keep him on fluids, monitor him. He needs rest. But Ethan, he's not out of the woods yet." Ethan just nodded, tears stinging his eyes as he squeezed Ranger's paw. "You're not going anywhere. Not after all this." While Ranger rested, Olivia checked Ethan's own injuries, a nasty bruise on his temple, cuts on his knuckles. "You need a CT scan and some sleep," she told him. But Ethan just shook his head. "No time, Liv. Madison's alive, I'm sure of it. I found her badge, her blood. There's a bunker out past Old Sawmill Road. Someone's using it. We have to go now, before they move her or cover their tracks." Olivia hesitated, glancing at Ranger, then nodded. "Give me 5 minutes to call Tom." She dialed Tom Brooks, a retired deputy with a reputation for honesty and guts, a man who'd mentored both Madison and Ethan when they first came on the force. Within minutes, Tom arrived in his old Jeep, shotgun on the seat, jaw set. Ethan filled them in, voice low and urgent. "Whoever's behind this, maybe even the chief, they've been cleaning up loose ends." Madison's last note pointed straight to that bunker. If she's alive, she won't last much longer in this weather. And if we're right, there's evidence there that could take down half the department. Tom nodded. "We'll go in quiet. I'll watch your back. Liv, can you stay with Ranger? Olivia hesitated, but then said, I'll be here. Just come back alive. Both of you. She hugged Ethan quickly, then turned her full attention to Ranger. Tom tossed Ethan a bulletproof vest and a spare sidearm. If things go bad, we don't call the local cops. We call the feds direct. Understood? Ethan nodded, loading the evidence, the badge, the journal page, the locator beacon, into a sealed bag. The snow had let up, but the woods beyond town were still thick with icy drifts and the shadows of old fears. Tom led the way, headlights off, navigating by memory and the faintest glow from Ethan's phone. Every bump in the trail felt like it could be an ambush, every whisper of wind a threat. Ethan's hands shook, not from cold, but from anticipation. Madison was out there. He felt it in his bones. They reached the bunker, creeping through the trees. The blast doors stood ajar now. Someone had come or gone since Ethan's first visit. Tom signaled for silence. Ethan's flashlight danced across the cracked cement, then froze. Fresh boot prints, dragging marks, and blood. Madison's blood led into a side tunnel. Inside, the air was thick, sour with the smell of old rot and recent violence. Ethan moved ahead, gun raised, Tom covering his flank. In a back room, little more than a concrete cell, they found her. Madison was slumped against the wall, wrists raw from zip ties, lips blue, but her eyes were fierce when the light hit her face. Coop? Her voice was a rasp, barely audible. Took you long enough. Ethan dropped to his knees, hands trembling as he cut her free. We've got you, Mads. We're getting you out. She managed a weak laugh, half defiance, half relief. Don't let them get the files. They'll kill anyone who knows. Tom covered the exit as Ethan lifted Madison, her body feather-light. Footsteps pounded somewhere above, a warning. We've got company, Tom called, shotgun cocked. Out the back, now, Ethan hissed, hauling Madison into the corridor, Tom close behind. They raced through twisting passages, cold air knifing through cracks. Outside, the blizzard had picked up again, wind wailing through the trees. They struggled through the drifts, Madison half conscious, but clinging to Ethan's jacket. Behind them, angry shouts echoed. They're running, get them! Bullets cracked through the trees, biting into trunks and ice. Tom fired back, buying time. Just as Ethan's strength began to fail, a shape burst from the trees, Ranger staggering but alive, Olivia close behind. I couldn't leave him, Olivia panted, eyes wild. He wanted to help. With Ranger limping at their side, the group stumbled into the Jeep. Tom floored it, tires spinning, snow flying. Ethan cradled Madison, Ranger's muzzle pressed against her shoulder. You made it, girl. We're here, he whispered, tears freezing on his lashes. They barreled into Pine Bridge, skidding to a stop outside the hospital. Nurses and neighbors, alerted by Olivia, poured out to help, ushering Madison, Ethan, and Ranger inside. The warmth and light was blinding after the storm. Word spread fast. Madison Lee had been found. Ethan Cooper, with his battered dog and a handful of brave friends, had saved her life. The town, fractured and wary for so long, rallied in a surge of support. People who'd barely spoken in years brought food, blankets, and prayers. Even a few hard-eyed deputies turned up, silent but respectful. As doctors worked on Madison and Ranger, Ethan sat in the waiting room, head in his hands, Tom at his side. Outside, the blizzard finally eased, dawn breaking gold on the snow. Ethan looked at the sunrise, hope fighting through exhaustion. The evidence was safe. Madison was alive. Ranger was a hero, but he knew this was just the beginning. With Olivia and Tom beside him, Ethan swore silently. He'd see this fight through to the end. The morning sun had never looked so fierce over Pine Bridge. It blazed against a sky scrubbed clean by the blizzard, turning the town's battered rooftops and icy streets into a field of diamonds. Word spread like wildfire. Madison Lee was alive. The battered, nearly broken officer had survived against all odds. The hospital parking lot filled with worried neighbors and local press, the buzz of hope mixing with nerves. In the trauma ward, Ethan hovered by Madison's bedside, Ranger dozing at their feet. His bandages fresh, but his gaze watchful. Madison came awake slowly, blinking against the harsh light. Her voice, though ragged, was urgent. "We don't have much time, Coop. They'll come after us. They know we're alive. The chief, he's in it up to his neck. Drugs, dirty money, witness intimidation. It goes deeper than we thought." She looked past Ethan to Olivia and Tom, their faces tight with concern but fierce in their resolve. "I have evidence, flash drives, audio files, notes. I hid some at my sister's, the rest in the bunker. But they have people everywhere. If you're with me, you need to be all in." Tom's reply was immediate, gravel in his voice. "We've been in since the day you vanished, kid." Ethan squeezed her hand. "We'll finish this, I swear." The hours ticked by in a blur of tension and whispered plans. With Madison's evidence in hand, Olivia called in a favor with her cousin, a state trooper with contacts at the FBI. By dusk, 2 unmarked SUVs rolled into Pine Bridge, the agents inside lean-faced and unsmiling. They swept into the hospital, weapons hidden but eyes sharp, gathering Madison's notes and listening to her story. She recounted everything: the threats, the shadowy meetings, the moment she'd been ambushed. Ethan's heart hammered as Madison named names: the police chief, 2 senior deputies, and a local businessman who'd been laundering money through construction contracts. The lead agent, Agent Norris, spoke in low, measured tones. "If we move too fast, they'll run. We need them all in one place. Are you willing to be bait, Officer Lee?" Madison didn't hesitate. "I've been a target for months. I'm not running now." The plan was set. A sting operation at the Pine Bridge police station, using Madison's miraculous survival and the evidence as the trigger. Olivia stayed behind to guard Ranger, who watched the door with a quiet intensity, his injured side barely slowing him. Ethan, Tom, and Madison, still pale but burning with defiance, drove to the station with the agents, adrenaline buzzing in their veins. The station itself seemed unchanged, fluorescent lights humming, coffee brewing, the bulletin board covered with weather alerts and lost dog posters. But beneath the surface, tension crackled like a downed wire. Madison limped in, head high, with Ethan and Tom flanking her. The chief looked up from his office, eyes narrowing. The 2 corrupt deputies lounged by the lockers, joking with the businessman who financed their schemes. Madison didn't flinch. "Chief Laird, I have evidence that will put you and your crew in prison. You can come quietly, or you can make a mess and let the feds clean it up. Your call." For a split second, time froze. Then the chief sneered, drawing his sidearm with practiced speed, aiming it at Madison's heart. The deputies reached for their own guns. Tom moved fast, his old reflexes kicking in. He stepped in front of Madison, shotgun raised, eyes cold as steel. "Don't even try it, Laird. This town's seen enough blood." Suddenly, the doors burst open, and Agent Norris and his team swept in, weapons drawn, voices booming. "FBI, drop your weapons, now!" In a moment that would play on Pine Bridge news for years, the chief's facade cracked. His hand shook, his mouth worked soundlessly. But finally, he dropped the gun. The deputies followed, hands high, faces pale. The businessman tried to slip out the back but was tackled by a rookie officer, whose eyes shone with the pride of doing something good for once. The standoff ended in a blur of handcuffs and shouted rights, Madison sagging against the wall, Ethan catching her before she fell. The agents led the corrupt officials out through the throng of stunned townsfolk and reporters. Cameras flashing, people cheered and jeered, some shouting Madison's name, others simply weeping at the relief of it all. Back at the hospital, Olivia and Ranger greeted the returning heroes. Ranger, bandaged but upright, became the center of attention. News crews snapped photos as children shyly reached out to pet him. The headlines would read, "Hero Dog Saves Officer, Uncovers Town Corruption." For years, Ranger had been called damaged goods, unfit for patrol after Madison disappeared. Now he was a symbol of resilience, of loyalty that refused to die. The town of Pinebridge, once divided by suspicion and fear, began to shift. People who'd kept to themselves brought food, flowers, handmade banners that read, "Thank you, Ranger," and "Welcome home, Madison." Even the old-timers who'd never trusted outsiders stood in the hospital hallway, hats in hand, eyes wet. Madison was cleared by the doctors. Her wounds clean, but her spirit changed. In a small ceremony a week later, the mayor, humbled and shaken, presented Ranger with a new medal. The children from the local elementary school read poems about bravery, and even the governor sent a letter praising the K-9 who had brought hope back to Pinebridge. As Ranger basked in the gentle attention, Madison hugged Ethan tight. "You kept your promise, Coop. You brought us all back." Ethan looked at Tom, Olivia, the crowd around them, and Ranger, always at his side. "No one does this alone," he said quietly. "Not anymore." The last of the TV vans rolled away, leaving the hospital's front lawn scattered with balloons, crumpled banners, and laughter. Ranger limped alongside Ethan, tail wagging, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, setting Pinebridge aglow. Justice had come at a cost. But for the first time in a long time, the future looked wide open, and for those who'd survived, finally safe. The world didn't magically fix itself after the arrests. For weeks, Pinebridge felt like a town holding its breath, waiting to see what came next. But out of the aftermath, out of the grief, the relief, the stunned silence, a new kind of energy began to pulse through the community. It started with a simple idea, spoken late one evening as Madison, Ethan, Olivia, and Tom gathered at Ethan's house, Ranger dozing between them. Madison sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands absently stroking Ranger's fur. "You know what Pinebridge really needs," she said quietly, her gaze soft but determined. "A place for second chances, not just for people like us, but for every K-9, every responder, every soul chewed up and spat out by this town's old ghosts." Ethan leaned back in his chair, the flicker of the fireplace dancing across his tired face. "You're talking about a sanctuary." "Yeah," Madison replied. "A place where nobody's ever just damaged goods. Where healing comes first. Where someone always has your back, even if it's 4 paws instead of 2 hands." Olivia nodded, her smile gentle but hopeful. A rescue and rehab center, therapy dogs, counseling for first responders, programs for veterans and kids. I could run the veterinary clinic on site, make sure no dog ever goes through what Ranger did. Tom grinned, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. "And I'll handle training, teach people to work with these dogs, give them a purpose again, maybe give myself one too." The room grew quiet, the kind of silence that signals a shared dream taking root. Ranger thumped his tail, eyes half open as if in approval. Within a month, the group pooled their savings, raised funds through community events, and convinced the town council to lease them the old fairgrounds just west of Main Street. Madison and Ethan drew up blueprints, simple at first, then more ambitious as volunteers signed on and donations poured in. By spring, the fences were mended, kennels rebuilt, and the big barn converted into a welcoming space filled with sunlight and warmth. They called it Shadow Sanctuary, a nod to both the shadows everyone carried and the hope of stepping into the light. Opening day felt like a festival. Families gathered in the morning mist, children clutching homemade signs and battered tennis balls. Veterans in worn jackets smiled shyly as Ranger, now nearly healed, limped up to greet them, accepting gentle pats and whispered thanks. Local bakers donated cookies and coffee. Musicians played soft tunes on battered guitars, and a sea of curious faces watched as Madison, standing beside Ethan and Olivia, cut the ribbon. Today, Madison announced, her voice strong and steady, is about new beginnings, for dogs who were left behind, for people who've been hurt, and for a community that refuses to let the past win. Her eyes shone as she looked down at Ranger, who sat beside her like a proud sentinel. Every healing starts with trust. Let's build it together. Shadow Sanctuary quickly became the beating heart of Pinebridge. The first residents were a trio of retired police dogs and a small pack of mutts rescued from abandoned houses. Olivia worked tirelessly in the new vet clinic, patching up wounds, easing pain, and teaching kids how to listen to the animals' silent language. She organized animal care classes for the local school and started a program where children could read to the dogs, a gentle way for anxious kids to practice reading aloud, always with a pair of big brown eyes cheering them on. Tom ran training sessions on Saturdays, his booming laughter echoing across the fields. He paired veterans with K9S, helping both rediscover trust and purpose. More than once, Ethan caught him wiping his eyes as a grizzled Marine and a scarred German Shepherd mastered a new command, both standing a little taller at the end of the day. Ethan, for his part, took charge of outreach and security, grant writing, fundraising, keeping an eye on things when old ghosts threatened to return. He found joy in the little victories. The first time a traumatized dog wagged its tail again, the moment a firefighter with PTSD smiled as he tossed a ball for Ranger, the look of pride on Madison's face when a former skeptic left a check with a handshake and a quiet apology. Ranger was everywhere, limping, still, but unstoppable. He became a legend for the town's kids, who crowded around him during Hero Story Hour, as Madison told the tale of his loyalty, his courage, and his refusal to give up on the people he loved. Ranger seemed to know he was needed, always choosing to sit beside the child or adult who was most afraid or most in need of comfort. He'd rest his big head in their lap, exhaling softly, sharing his quiet strength. Pinebridge itself began to change. Old rivalries faded, replaced by a new sense of pride. Local businesses sponsored kennel renovations. Retired officers volunteered their time. A garden sprang up behind the sanctuary, tended by seniors who shared stories as they worked beside the younger volunteers. Community events brought everyone together, from block parties to memorial runs in honor of fallen K9S and first responders. Sometimes, Madison would stand on the back porch at dusk, Ranger at her side, watching families laugh and children race across the field. She'd think about everything they'd lost and everything they'd built in its place. The pain and shadows hadn't vanished, but the sanctuary was proof that scars could become part of something beautiful. Late one evening, as the sun melted into gold over the fields, Ethan joined Madison outside. "Did you ever think we'd make it here?" he asked, his voice quiet, full of wonder and exhaustion. Madison smiled, leaning against him, Ranger's head pressing between them. "Not for a second." but I'm glad we didn't stop trying. The sanctuary lights twinkled on, guiding lost souls home. Sometimes, after the storms pass, you only really understand what's been left behind. Ethan found himself thinking about that often in the months after the Shadow Sanctuary opened its doors. Spring rain gave way to hot, golden afternoons, and the fields around the sanctuary filled with wildflowers. Pinebridge was changing, not just on the surface, but deep down where it mattered. It was on one of those quiet afternoons that Ethan sat on the porch of the old barn, his journal open, pen resting against the page. Ranger lay at his feet, eyes half closed, chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. In the distance, he could hear children laughing, the thud of boots on dirt as Tom's veterans ran a training session, and the steady, cheerful chatter of Olivia instructing a group of volunteers in the clinic. He started to write, the words tumbling out in a way that felt both new and familiar. Loyalty isn't about obedience, Ethan wrote. It's about risking everything for someone who can't ask for help, about holding on when giving up would be easier, about showing up over and over when the world turns its back on you. He paused, glancing at Ranger. The dog stirred, sensing the attention, and thumped his tail once against the porch. Ethan smiled. The truth was, Pinebridge had always been a town shaped by storms, floods, fires, hard winters, and more quietly, the storms inside people's hearts. He thought about Madison's courage, about the way Olivia refused to look away from pain, about Tom's stubborn loyalty. Most of all, he thought about the quiet, enduring strength of a dog everyone else had given up on. Even the strongest can be abandoned. Ethan knew that now. Healing didn't come from pretending nothing hurt. It started when you let yourself reach out, even if your hands were shaking. That's what Shadow Sanctuary had become. A place where people and animals learned to trust again, to heal together, to take back the pieces of themselves left scattered by loss. The sanctuary's story was Ranger's story, and Madison's, and Ethan's too. But it belonged to Pinebridge now. Word of their work spread far beyond the county. First responders from neighboring towns called, asking for help. Veterans from across the state wrote letters, some showing up with nothing but a duffel bag and a haunted look. Each was met with an open door and a promise. You're safe here. No one is ever just damaged goods. Some days, the sanctuary felt like the busiest place in town. Dozens of people and dogs moving in and out, each one finding something they hadn't realized they'd lost. Ethan watched a local teenager, scarred by a house fire, teaching an anxious rescue mutt to fetch. He watched a retired officer, who had once looked at Ranger with skepticism, break down in tears when the dog laid his head in his lap, refusing to leave until the man could breathe again. At other times, the sanctuary was quiet, touched by a sense of peace that felt almost holy. On those evenings, Madison would join Ethan on the porch, a mug of coffee warming her hands. She'd tell him about the letters she received, thank yous, confessions, stories of hope sparked by what they'd built. You know, I think this was always what we were meant to do, she said one night. Her voice soft, the sun setting behind the trees, not chasing criminals, not fighting the darkness, just giving people a place to come back to. Ethan nodded. Ranger knew it all along. He just had to drag us here. They laughed together. The sound light, full of healing. Ranger stirred, nudging his head under Ethan's hand, as if to say, finally. As months turned to seasons, the sanctuary became a symbol, a living, breathing reminder that pain could bind a community together just as surely as joy. They held annual memorials for lost officers and K9S. They celebrated the victories, small and large, a dog overcoming his fear of thunderstorms, a firefighter sleeping through the night for the first time in years, A family who had lost everything finding laughter around the bonfire again. Ethan saw it everywhere. In the murals kids painted on the old barn walls. In the flowers volunteers planted along the fences. In the way neighbors now waved to each other at the market. Even the town's annual parade included a shadow sanctuary float. Ranger sitting proudly at the front, flanked by grinning children and saluting veterans. The whole crowd cheering as they rolled down Main Street. He reflected on the storm that had started it all. The blizzard, the pain, the fear. The long dark nights when hope felt impossible. Sometimes, he wrote, the storm tears everything apart so we can see what's worth putting back together. Years ago, he never would have believed Pinebridge could change. But it had. Not because the shadows disappeared, but because enough people decided to build something better in their place. One afternoon, as rain pattered softly against the roof, Ethan closed his journal, looking down at Ranger. The old shepherd gazed up at him, gray now around the muzzle, eyes still bright. "We did it, old friend," Ethan whispered. "You did it." Ranger rested his head on Ethan's foot, a gesture of trust and love that needed no words. The sanctuary's work would never really be done. There would always be pain, always storms, but the lessons they'd learned, the courage to reach out, the strength to trust, the power of loyalty, would ripple out from this place, touching lives Ethan and Ranger would never even meet. Some storms, it turned out, could lead you home. Years passed, marked not by loss, but by quiet victories and the rhythms of daily life at Shadow Sanctuary. The sanctuary had become a pillar of Pinebridge, a place where laughter was as common as the bark of a dog, where grief was welcomed but never allowed to settle for long. In the crisp morning air, you could hear the squeals of children playing fetch with a line of eager dogs, the hum of Tom's whistle as he called trainees to attention, and the low, gentle voice of Olivia instructing a group of new volunteers in the art of patience and kindness. Ethan walked the grounds every day, watching the cycles of healing repeat. A frightened rescue K9 arriving in the back of a van, cowering in the corner. Weeks later, bounding across the yard with a newfound friend. A firefighter haunted by memories, learning to breathe easy again in the company of a patient four-legged shadow. Every story was different, but the pattern was always the same. Pain giving way to hope. Hope blooming into something stronger and brighter. Ranger grew older, his muzzle turning silver, his steps slower but still purposeful. He became the soul of the sanctuary, the first face a new arrival would see, the gentle spirit that offered reassurance with a soft nudge or a warm gaze. For children afraid of dogs, he was their introduction, patient, steady, unthreatening. For veterans racked by nightmares, he was a silent companion through long, sleepless nights. There were days when Ethan would find Ranger dozing in a patch of sunlight, a half-dozen puppies curled around him, or sitting with a new K9, sharing a silent bond forged in hardship. The old shepherd had seen more than most, carried scars inside and out, but never lost the ability to love, without hesitation, without fear. One late autumn afternoon, with leaves drifting across the fields and the last of the sun warming the porch, the sanctuary prepared for its biggest event yet, the annual Hope Day celebration. Families and supporters gathered, some from far beyond Pinebridge, drawn by the sanctuary's reputation and the stories that seemed almost too good to be true. Local bakers lined the tables with pies and cookies. High school students painted faces and ran games. And everywhere, dogs of every size and stripe romped in the grass. Joy uncontained. It was at the center of this gathering that Madison took the stage, a humble platform built under a sprawling oak tree. She looked out over the crowd, parents, children, officers in crisp uniforms, veterans with service medals, the town's mayor, and, front and center, a graying ranger resting at Ethan's feet. The hush that fell was not somber, but electric with anticipation. Madison's voice rang clear. When we started Shadow Sanctuary, we had no idea how far its reach would go. We just wanted a place where broken things, broken hearts, broken dogs, broken dreams, could find a little peace, a little healing. But what we found was so much more. She paused, glancing at Ranger, her eyes shining. We found that the world is full of storms, and sometimes our greatest heroes are the ones nobody wanted. A ripple of emotion passed through the crowd, many nodding, some brushing away tears. Madison continued, her voice steady. Ranger was left behind, labeled damaged goods. But he saved my life, saved Ethan's life, and changed this whole community just by refusing to give up. That's what this sanctuary is all about. Not giving up, no matter how hard things get. Not turning away when it hurts. Believing in second chances. Not just for our animals, but for ourselves. She gestured to the people gathered around, to the sanctuary buildings, the flowers planted in memory of those lost, and the children now running joyfully in the late sun. Look at what hope can build. Every scar, every hardship, every storm you've survived. It can become the foundation for something better. Applause broke out, rolling across the field. Ethan lifted Ranger gently onto the stage, and the old shepherd stood, regal and calm, as the crowd cheered. A little girl approached, holding a new collar in her hands. She knelt, eyes wide, and fastened it around Ranger's neck, a collar stitched with the words, "Forever Home." Ranger licked her cheek, then sat, tail wagging, as if he knew exactly what it all meant. The ceremony continued, but for Ethan, the most meaningful moment came at the very end. As dusk settled and families lingered, he led Ranger to the entrance of the sanctuary, where a small bronze paw print had been set into the concrete path, a permanent tribute to the dog who had started it all. Ethan pressed Ranger's paw gently into the clay before it dried, leaving a mark for all who would come after. Children pressed their hands into the cement beside Ranger's print, giggling, their parents watching with quiet pride. Madison joined Ethan, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "He's not just our hero," she whispered. "He's everyone's now." Ethan nodded, fighting a lump in his throat. "And this place, this hope, it's here to stay." As the stars began to prick the sky, laughter and music drifted from the sanctuary. The lights in the barn glowed warm, the sounds of healing and new beginnings echoing across the fields. Ranger lay at the entrance, content, eyes closing as the day faded. Before the night was over, Madison stood once more before the gathered crowd. Her words were an invitation, not just to Pine Bridge, but to anyone who might be listening, near or far. If you've ever felt lost or alone, if you've ever wondered if you could be found, remember Ranger. Remember this place. Maybe your own rescue is closer than you think. People lingered under the stars, reluctant to leave the peace they'd found here, some promising to return, others simply grateful to have been a part of it all. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended between sorrow and hope. Ethan watched the families and children at the sanctuary, laughter rising, lives forever changed. Ranger's paw print glimmered in the lantern light, a silent promise that hope survives, even in the harshest winters. And for everyone who passed through those gates, Shadow Sanctuary was proof that, no matter the darkness, second chances and love would always be waiting.